Oh, we're going to YouTube, and then you'll
Yes.
put it back to Ponder,
Well, no, it'll be
the
both.
page.
If you're ready, okay,
Is
one,
it
two,
playing on the stream as well?
yeah, one, two, three, go.
All right. Hey, everybody. So I'm back on radio. Been roaming the country these past about 14, 15 months. In Vegas right now, and looking to be headed back towards at least in the direction of Texas here pretty soon. Uh, so it's been a pretty exciting trip. I started out in Arkansas and rode down to Texas and Tennessee and out to the Northwest where I'd never been, up through Montana and South Dakota, or was it North Dakota? I guess it was. Washington State, Spokane, and down to Washington or Oregon and California and Vegas by this past September. So I came for the Bundy trials. I was out there in 2014 in Bunkerville, and so was Brand Thornton, and he's here with me today. And we're gonna talk. Well, from Bunkerville to Burns and beyond. But we're gonna do a lot of talking on the Oregon standoff and explore what went on up there. And we'll come back and circle around and kind of a spaghetti bowl this a little bit, as somebody once called it. So kind of like Winnie the Pooh. Here I am. And so, Gander, I appreciate you coming on to produce this and be back on radio now.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you back, Vinny.
Thanks, man. Well, Bran, are you ready to? Let me. I'll move this mic over here, so I'm going to set it back in between us over here. Grimner, I won't be able to hear anything, but I'll be watching this tablet over here in the chat. So be monitoring that here. Looks like we're all set to go. So, all right. There we go. All righty. So here we got Brand Thornton. And we were at the same place at one point in time. And then again, now here we are back. And let's just start out with a little introduction, because I've gotten to know you here just these last few weeks and been spending time with you. We went up to Denver for Bruce Doucette. We observed that trial up there and how the procedures went. And I've talked some about that, and we'll have more to say as well. But we're seeing is a definite deficit in justice in the criminal court systems across the land. John Lamb's been out and about it's just commonplace. Now, you're from where was you born? You've been here in Vegas a good part of your life, mostly growing up.
Yeah, I was born and raised here. There's 5 generations here. I left for about 19 years. I lived in Montana. Came back about the early 90s, around 1990, and been here ever since. Been getting involved in different things. I think the biggest wake-up call that I've ever had in my life was the Waco, Texas massacre. And
come a little closer, Mike.
Okay.
Thank you, Free.
Prior to that, of course, we had the Ruby Ridge fiasco where the FBI framed Randy Weaver, and that kind of got me started watching, what our government was up to. And it was obvious to me that there was, a lot of wrong there. The way they went in and killed his wife and killed his son, and pretty much the FBI and those things has been untouchable. They can pretty much do whatever they want and get away with it. And then, of course, we had the Waco, Texas fiasco. And prior to that happening, there was 2 gentlemen that came here to Las Vegas, Nevada, by the name of Bo Greitz and Jack McLam. And we were at the old Showboat Hotel, and it had been advertised for a period of time. And there's about 500 people that showed up to listen to Bo Greitz and Jack McLam. I think I got his last name right. And we all took an oath, all 500 of us. We raised our arm to the square, and took an oath to uphold the Constitution and defend it against all enemies, both domestic and terror. Can't think of the right word. Anyhow, both domestic and foreign.
Foreign and domestic, yeah.
Yeah, foreign and domestic.
What year was that?
That would have been about 1994, 95. And, it became obvious to a lot of us that something was really going south in this country. There's a lot of problems. They killed, murdered something like 83 men, women, and children in Waco, and then did all they could to cover it up. It took the Texas Rangers to actually go in after most of the evidence had been removed to come up with enough evidence to show that the Bureau, Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, was the real culprit there. David Koresh and his little group, they were a fringe group, but nevertheless, they were not breaking any laws. There was no reason to do what they did except for under the Clinton administration. I truly believe that they were trying to send a message to the rest of America that you better get in line, do whatever we tell you to do, or you're going to end up the same. And I think that message was pretty loud and clear and went throughout this country, but there's a lot of people who disagreed with it. And, they had the foresight to see what was taking place and that if this was allowed to continue, that it wouldn't be much longer and we'd all be under tyrannical rule. So that was my first wake-up call, the biggest one. And I've, kind of paid attention and focused on it ever since, trying to figure out where I personally would fit in to fight for freedoms in this country. I got a lot invested with children, grandchildren. I brought them into this world, and I can't expect anybody else to protect them but myself.
I've had the pleasure to meet several of your family members, your brother, and some of your sons. Grandkids. We spent a lot of time together. It's a real, not just a privilege, but really an honor to get to know you.
Thank you.
I'll stand up for you. I'll testify to your character and what you're doing.
Well, here's the same with you too. I've been around Vincent, just a few months. And Vincent, I've actually been pretty impressed with your knowledge and your approach to things. And I think you're really a level-headed guy. You got a firm grasp on what's going on. So there's not too many of us like that around here.
I can feel that. I appreciate them words. Now we're talking about people not feeling content with the way things are going in government. But now, just recently, we have a couple more whistleblowers coming out behind Wooten and the BLM. I've just seen some of that prosecution. Of course, once that all sealed up, one of those courts, John Lamb was just up in there. They sealed that court to the public. The man didn't get to stand up for himself or nothing. Shut him down and sentenced him after 45 minutes, or at least found him guilty. The jury did. 45 minutes deliberation. I guess it don't take long when the game's rigged. Yep. And we've seen that, you and I together. We've seen how this happens. And now we're seeing it being exposed across the land. Now there's issues of how somebody should be going about with this and that, but people are taking a stand, and there's a lot of mistakes or bumps in the road, that's going to come down here on this road to real, true, peaceful coexistence of freedom. And we really gotta seek that out, because there's a lot of twists and turns in that road too. So it's easy to get lost. What do you know about so far about the whistleblowers? You're these two new ones. You got any?
Well, it's really new information. It is dealing directly with Todd Engel and his appeal process and what he's been going through. The fact is, during his last trials, where Judge Gloria Navarro dismissed with prejudice that a lot of this information started to come out. And, the government and the courts, these federal courts, and even state courts, they do all they can to hide the evidence. And, even when they get caught, like Steve Myrie has gotten caught in all kinds of hiding exculpatory evidence, Brady violations, Giglio violations. But what's happened to Steve Myrie? Okay, well, he didn't get his promotion. Is that the worst thing that's going to happen to him? So this man should be tried. He should be arrested immediately and then tried and prosecuted because, he has no compassion. He has no compulsion as far as sending innocent men to prison for life if he can. These men are, in my very strong personal opinion, are evil people. Anybody who will go down that road to throw innocent men in prison for any number of years, but we were looking at, life for many of these people. And he had no problems with hiding exculpatory evidence that would have showed that these men were innocent. So this is a real problem. I wish it was just unique to here in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the federal courts, but it isn't. It's all across this nation. We've seen it time and time again. John Lamb has done a great job in exposing this. The one that you just mentioned up there in Montana, it was a very good example. You and I went to Bruce Doucette's trial. That was over before we even got there. It's good that we did go to observe it. That was really important because we were able to see the groundwork that the federal government is laying to go after these unindicted co-conspirators. And, when we got to looking at it even closer, we realized that the people that are pushing this are more than likely embedded with the government. This is an end around. They lost these court cases to get these patriots and the Bundys in prison. Well, this is an end around to come back after patriots, Bundys, anybody that signs on to this common law court system, and specifically in signing liens and arrest warrants to go after, the political enemies, which are corrupt politicians, grant you. But there's an old saying, and you can't take the master's tools to tear down the master's house. And that's what they're trying to do, because you always end up in recognized federal courts or recognized state courts. And that is the master's tools right there. And you can't beat them. You just mentioned what they had talked about, or what you had talked about in the jury instructions. There is absolutely no way with those jury instructions that anybody can win in that court. Okay, that's the catch right there. It's the whole thing is nothing but a big trap. And we looked at the people that were pushing it, the people that have been sponsoring, and people that have been supporting the National Liberty Alliance. And the big name that jumped out at me is when I found out that Gary Hunt is involved in that whole thing. Well, we know all about Gary Hunt, his 91-page documents where he, recorded those individuals. He's an agent provocateur. He's always throwing out ideas that are bad ideas that are only going to get the patriots in a real bind and get them in these courts, and then that'll prove their undoing. So that's one name I'd like to throw out right off the top, and everybody that's involved with that whole upper echelon of that organization. I think people need to be very, very aware of what's going on.
Okay, there's certainly a lot to be talked about there, and let me back up to Myrie. He's in the past, he's been found guilty of using Giglio and Brady violations, and they just move him on. Now, I understand they put him in charge of the Vegas shooting,
Yeah.
fiasco there, which is unbelievable. So, hey, by the way, hello everybody in chat. I see Cowboy and Chloe, and there's Flashes and Free, and the great mighty Grimner. Yes, yes, yes. Free Enslaved, and who else is back up in there? I was just scrolling. Okay, but anyways, Heidi, I'm glad you guys are tuned in. This is premiere of a new broadcast. I don't remember exactly how long I've been off there now. A year or maybe some months. I've been traveling 12 or 14 or 15, I guess. So anyways, let me get back into this then. We go back and we're seeing a pattern. That's what I'm seeing, a definite pattern of corruption. And these prosecutors and all those involved, Dan Love, many past discrepancies. These people are just thugs. My experience with Robert Shapiro, the robber Robert Shapiro, the district attorney in Denver, he falls right in there with that shoot to kill and cover up. Him threatening me, insinuating that I was harassing them, exercising my First Amendment rights. So I find that very disturbing that he would be so bold to open his mouth out in public and say that. Don't me not having a recording going, but I think that will be an addendum on my notification in public. You may be being recorded. So we go. Let's talk just a little bit more about Bruce Doucette. I came to see him over just a few days in court, and I think I really saw the reflection of who that man is, and a good man, I'd say. Definitely, obviously, fell into a trap. Coming to be sentenced to what will equate to the rest of his life in prison for trying to stand up against the system. Definitely a terrible thing. And as Brand was saying, the jury instructions really just say, the judge is saying, look here, this is how this goes. He was charged with this. He did this. Doesn't matter why he did it or what he was hoping to accomplish or bring to attention or no. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Thank you, Brand. What they're saying there is that by my own authority, I declare that you will have to find in this way, this manner. And so they're really left without any choice. I saw the confliction in a couple, at least, of the jurors' faces. And it's like, wow, we have no choice. Dan Love. Talk about Dan.
Dan P. Love. He needs to change his last name to Dan P. Hate or whatever. He abuses his last name terribly. There's no love in that man. He is an egomaniac, a narcissist. Found himself in some positions of power. I think that came down from Neil Corrins, which was Harry Reid's handpicked administrator over the Bureau of Land Management. And, it's pretty obvious. It should be clear to everybody what they were going for. They're trying to build up a domestic army out of the BLM. It has been militarized. And, they got the federal courts supporting them. Probably the biggest eye-opener in these last whole trials was the fact that Gloria Navarro said you cannot exercise your First and Second Amendment rights when any law enforcement officer, regardless who it was, but she was referring mostly to the Bureau of Land Management, is in the performance of their duties. That is an assault. Just if he even sees your firearm, you have assaulted that law officer. So Dan P. Love, he was the spearhead is picked to, head up this new military organization which is going to sweep over the West, was going to enslave all the ranchers, farmers, loggers, miners, and take all of our natural resources away from us and give them to their pet projects of Harry Reid. That's what that whole thing was about. in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but they had to have this Gestapo type individual. Now, Dan P. Love, that man is probably about, I'm gonna guess, about 6'4". He's a big man. He's a tall man.
Very tall.
Yeah.
Imposing figure.
I was looking up to him, not symbolically, but literally. And he's, like I said, he's a typical egomaniac, narcissist. His history bears that out. We know what he did up there at the Burning Man Festival, and what he's done with a lot of artifacts. What he did with Dr. Red drove him to suicide, and then took a lot of those artifacts that were involved in that and some other things and made gifts out of them to, people that were working under him. Now, just think about that. They showed up with, what was it, something like a 100-man SWAT team at Dr. Red's. There's an article on that. It's called Sting in the Desert. And here's a man who's been a stalwart in his community, who delivered probably the majority of the children in that little community, was loved by everybody, had never done anything wrong in his life, had no history, no record of wrongdoing at all. And he was able to get this man boxed in a corner over a little teeny shell, which is smaller than a dime. At one time, it was appraised at possibly worth $75. Well, Dan P. Love had that hiked up to $1,000 or more so that he could get a felony charge out of it. And, if I were to see that little thing on the ground, I probably would have stepped on it and just, I wouldn't even bother to pick the damn thing up. I would have no interest in it. I've said that many, many times about any of these artifacts. They mean absolutely nothing to me. I think it's, why does anybody want to go and study these artifacts, which it means little or nothing to our civilization today, and then hold people accountable for accidentally or intentionally picking up one of these stupid little things? It doesn't make any sense at all to me. I often think of what our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ said, let the dead bury the dead. Well, the spiritually dead, they're still messing around with people that died, hundreds and even thousands of years ago, trying to figure them out. The fact of the matter is that was a civilization that had gone into a spiral case of extinction. And we want to study what, and they use this in the Antiquities Act like it's something really important.
Well,
it's not important at all to me.
It's important to others, and
Sure.
Certainly for it's important to know our history, our past.
Well, that's not our history, though.
Well, there is a history, and there's to be learned. A lot of the Mayan, the Aztec culture, all that was in a lot of scrolls. And back to Alexandria and burning that library and all the destruction of knowledge and to keep us ignorant. So I don't think that some petroglyphs means that you need to shut down 30 or 60,000 acres to preserve that. Maybe you're going to need a fence, okay, because there's a lot of idiots. All right, but I think there's certainly a middle ground that can be seen out of all this, and that's what we're seeking, a ponder gander, if you will, thinking a look.
Well, I buried a can about 20 years ago in a place in Montana, put some things in it, and I left an envelope that is supposed to be dug up in 200 years so they could see the artifacts that I left in there. Yeah. And one of them was a Pepsi can. So.
Yeah, I think I've left some artifacts along the way as well. Broken glass. Yeah. So let's move up to 2014. How'd you hear about what was going on out there in Riverside?
Well,
on a Bundy Ranch.
Hearing about it wasn't so much an important thing. It was all over Southern Nevada, the newspapers. The important thing to me and to my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Roy Potter, was we had come to a realization we needed an event. We could see that things were going downhill in this country really fast. We were being boxed in, and we had an event that took place right here in southern Nevada that give us something to hang our hat on and, go make a statement. I told Cliven Bundy myself how much I appreciated his family and what they did. It gave so many of us an opportunity to stand. And that might be hard for some people to wrap their brains around. But prior to that, we were just kind of sitting back and watching this huge takeover by, the Obama administration, Clinton administration, the Bush administration. And we saw that the noose was getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And one of my favorite sayings actually was put out by Matt Wandersea. Oh, you're going to fight him on your doorstep? How tactfully stupid is that? We needed an event. And fortunately, Cliven Bundy and his family were standing on rock solid constitutional ground. We knew that. There's a lot of us that knew that. And, really, when you stop and think about it, the BLM played right into Cliven's hands. They went in there like gangbusters, like a militarized unit, terrorizing the town of Mesquite. A lot of people haven't even heard that story, how they were basically drag racing through that town with their convoys. They wouldn't stop at any red lights. They would have a convoy of a dozen or more vehicles, and they would just keep on going through the lights. I know there's one trooper, I don't recall his name. I just got to meet him on the 12th when we were gassing up there in Mesquite. But a trooper pulled up, walked over to me while I was gassing up, and then two Metro officers pulled up, deputy sheriffs, and three of them came over and talked to me. And before he even got to me, he started extending his hand like 10 feet away to let me know that he was friendly, But he told me a story. He did not even realize what had taken place when the Gold Butte had been shut down, the Gold Butte allotment. He took his children, some of his children, they went four-wheeling out in the desert, and they come around a corner, and they were looking down gun barrels of the BLM. So there was a lot of stories like that was taking place that you never did hear about. But we all knew what happened to Davy Bundy. Amazing story. The only thing he did was step out of his vehicle to take some pictures of the illegal roundup. And then right above him and behind him was two snipers with their rifles, their scopes trained upon Davy Bundy. They were the BLM, who has no law enforcement authority whatsoever, decided to arrest him, beat him up, ground his face into the ground. They held him overnight, kidnapped him, held him overnight as a hostage, made fun of him, poking at him, making crude and rude remarks to him. And then the next day they brought him here to Las Vegas. And as I understood it, they took him, first of all, to the Henderson Police Department. They wanted him to be incarcerated. They said there's no law in the books where we can hold him, so we're not going to take him. Then they took him to the Metro Police Department, the jail there, and tried to get them to hold him. And they said, no, he has broken no laws that we know of, and we're not going to take him. So the Bureau of Land Management, the organization, has no law enforcement authority whatsoever, kicked him out on the streets. He had to borrow a cell phone to call his family and let him know what had taken place. And so Cliven drove into town and got him, took him back. So that was just one incident. There were some other incidences, such as with Margaret
Houston.
Margaret Houston, we call her Aunt Margaret. They threw her down
sister.
Yeah, for doing nothing more than taking pictures. There were some other relatives that I think it was over by Overton, went through the same thing. They threw them down, ground their face into the dirt, and arrested them.
That's the teenagers there.
Yeah, a couple teenagers there. Eventually, they weren't held very long. But this is a type of thing that they were doing there, and that's not even mentioning the abuse of the cattle and how they were rounding them up the wrong time of the year. Those calves, they need their mama's milk, they need their mamas, and they were left behind for coyote bait. There were so many of them died out on the range. They were running those cattle way too hard. And then some of the prize bulls, at least one prize bull, they shot and killed from a helicopter.
I believe it was 3, but it may only be 2. But I believe Cliven told me 3.
Okay.
And I got the chance to ride around all day just a few weeks ago with Cliven and a fella reporting or out there photographing for Taywilds at High Country News, Andrew. And pretty nice guy, very interesting. He spent like 5 years over in Mongolia. Just a pretty incredible life he's living. A wanderer as well, just like me.
All this stuff took place under Dan P. Love. I think that's what we were getting at. There's one other little thing I'd like to mention. There was a group of us who went up with Angus McIntosh. If you don't know Angus McIntosh, Google his name. He's probably the foremost authority on land rights issues in the West. He actually worked for the Forest Department at one time. And a group of us went up to document the destruction that the BLM had done to Cliven's water systems. Over 100 years, they've been putting these water systems in that not only benefited the cattle, but it benefited the local flora and fauna that was there. Some protected desert bighorn sheep were feeding out of those water systems. The desert mule deer, and then there's some endangered species such as, I think it's the western flycatcher, were using those water sources. Then, you got the local birds, upland game, quail, chukars. There's a whole litany of animals that were using those that are no longer there. So we really had a genocide of the local animals, that were using those also, which never comes to the out to the front where people can look at it. So, you got all these friends of the animals. They never said one damn thing about all these animals that were dying for the lack of water. So all of this happened under the direction of Dan P. Love.
Yeah. While I was out traveling with Cliven, we went up to do a little repair on some piping up. We went to the headwaters up there where the spring comes out of the ground, and that goes down through a series of piping and splits off. It goes down and feeds several tanks, so that there's several springs up in the mountain that they run water down where it wouldn't otherwise be available. So, cattle's going to roam so far, and they can only go as far as they can go to, and then get back to water. There's some wild cattle out there, and they're doing a good service. There needs to be a whole lot more cattle on the land out there.
Mm-hmm.
You showed me that video on that intensive regreening the desert in Africa.
Alan Lavore.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Alan Lavore.
Very good.
TED Talks.
Yeah. So we see that animals on the land are a benefit. And if you're looking, you'll see supposedly, I guess, about 99% of everything that's ever lived is extinct. So if man did not intervene, I think that progression would continue at the same rate. Now we can slow it down. The rancher is not harming, not the tortoise or the land. Matter of fact, I seen it and had it demonstrated to me there. That if you beat the brush to the ground, a lot of it's a type of a sage, burrow brush. There's a variety of stuff that is just the same thing for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and that is benefited by the cattle grazing on it for the browsing of other animals. And the water hole, talk about the quail and give us a little cycle and maybe just real quick.
Well, you got two major game animals there, upland game animals. You got quail and you got chukar. Chukar is actually transplanted from, I think, from Asia, the Himalayan mountains. They're India. They're not native to this country, but they have really fit in very, very well. And that's pretty much their only water source in those hills is what Cliven has done there. Now, I have hunted that since I was a teenager, and used to chase those quail around those hills all over the place when I was a kid. And so, that recreational opportunity would not even exist if it weren't for Cliven's water system. So, Otherwise, it's just desert. It's a biological, basically it's a biological disaster. You're going to have some lizards and some scorpions out there. But when you bring in a rancher with his cattle, it changes everything. Like you were just saying, the foliage, all that type of stuff starts to turn lush and increases. And of course, with it comes all of the different animals and birds and insects that really change the whole landscape completely into something that is not only beneficial to man, but is beneficial to wildlife.
Cliven was pointing out a pathway. So where I spent, 11 days the first time, and then 28 days the next round out there in Riverside, and I got to really experience the country. I lived not far from there and worked up in Mesquite back in the 80s, so not a stranger to the land there. Now, the cattle out there had been grazing for a good long time. There used to be a lot more cattle, I guess, probably. Most of the other ranchers are gone, sold their water rights or forced out, and so forth. Now, so many years ago, some many decades back, when they were running about, I guess, some 6,000 head of sheep across there, they had like 4 days, I guess. And where they trampled down, their hooves would like plow up or till just a little bit, and leaving in their wake a much finer environment, more grasses, and also the dung. And Cliven says he suspects the tortoise was benefited even more so from the sheep dung than the cattle dung, which I've been trying to find or document them eating some poop, but not so far. Definitely benefiting the land. So, when did you get to Bunkerville? April of 11th or before?
No, it was the day after Davy Bundy had been arrested.
Okay.
And I think that would have been around like the 8th.
Yeah, 6th or the 8th.
Something like 9th, that. Something like that. I thought I'd spent about a week there, roughly. Before we came back to Vegas to upload a bunch of stuff. But I saw it as an opportunity. Roy Potter saw it as an opportunity. It was an event that we can hang our hats on and go out and make a stand. And we initially got out there, and of course, him and I got a lot of religious things in common. And we went and performed some ancient priesthood ordinances. Roy is very, very intelligent. He's got his, I believe it's his master's degree in history, and primarily he likes to study, the Old Testament and everything that goes along with that. And so, either we did it symbolically or we did expect some results. I personally expected some results that I thought did bear fruit. So, but then that was just the beginning. And, the more we had the opportunity to talk to Ammon Bundy and Ryan Bundy and Cliven and some others and, his family, and we really got a good feel for what was going on really quick because so much of that stuff was not in the news. And the most exciting thing for me is when the caravan was coming out of the hills, they had that rendering truck. They had a front loader, I think our backhoe on top of it. And then they had 12 BLM vehicles, BLM and Forest Service vehicles that was escorting them out of the hills. And I actually was standing right next to Ammon he had a set of binoculars and I had a set of binoculars. And I asked him, I said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, we need to find out what's in the back of that truck. We believe they're either killing our cattle or they're tearing up the infrastructure that we had installed. So that was the whole idea. We just wanted to see what was in the back of the truck, okay? Like that's some big-ass crime, So, of course, they weren't going to stop for us, so we had to do something. And where they came out of the hills, there was some private property. I think they actually made the wrong turn. I think they got confused.
Well, that if you'll look on a Google map or the earth there and go to Riverside, Nevada, and exit 112 off of Interstate 15. You go down, you cross over the river. The first road to the right down there goes to Gold Butte. Now, if you made a 90-degree turn, you're going toward Cliven Bundy's farm down there. And if you go straight ahead, there's a dirt road. And that goes up. This is one of these roads that goes up into the hills and back up into a stream, or a spring, that is. And so that's where they came down at. That's where you'll see Ammon Bundy on his four-wheeler in the dump truck, where Cliven's sister Margaret gets thrown to the ground, where Dave Bundy had his face ground in. He'll continue on that same road instead of turning right, going towards Mesquite, towards Bunkerville and onto Mesquite, and you'll find where the interstate across on the other side of the river. That's the Virgin River, a big wash and a big bridge there. That's where the stand took place. And so on the opposite side of the river, there's a road that comes down out of the mountains there, and that's right in there where Dave Bundy's encounter was at. And Stetsy was there saying, they're trying to tell him to go to the pig pen, to the First Amendment rights. So did you see that?
I never actually saw the First Amendment. I'd seen pictures of it. I heard about it. And I'm kind of grateful I didn't see it, because I'm afraid that between Colonel Potter and I, we would have probably tore them up. That was pretty much our feelings on that whole thing. It was amazing to me, the attitude of these BLM agents, most of them from out of state, and interesting enough, most of them for Oregon, where they were all trained, but there were some local ones there too. But, they come out of them vehicles with an incredible attitude, like they own the friggin' country, that they had a mandate to do to us whatever they wanted to do. And they found out real quick it wasn't going to work. They made some comments, and we quickly made some comments back. And when I say we, just in general, everybody was telling take a hike, and they made some comments that really rubbed us the wrong way. Next thing you know, they're throwing Aunt Margaret to the ground, tasing Ammon Bundy, sicking their dogs on people. They sicked their dogs on a pregnant gal there. There's off the screen there that you never did get to see. I found it really interesting. They actually sicked one of their dogs onto me. The dog ran up to me like he was going to bite me, and grabbed me, and I said a couple of choice words to the dog, and the dog ran around, went right behind his handler and stopped. So there was a lot of interesting things that took place at that time. But it was obvious that we have this militarized BLM, no longer Smokey the Bear, no longer, our friend to help us, but something completely different. And it was a real eye-opener what was going on in this country. But by that time, people were pretty darn fed up. The word was out what they had been doing to people, and we simply weren't going to back down. Now, I have my theories why they decided to vacate that area immediately, because there was a couple of armed militia individuals that were across the bridge, and I think they got the word that these guys were there, and they were easily within rifle range as things turned bad.
You said Easley.
Yeah, I said Easley. How much do I owe you for using
yours is free.
Oh, mine's free. So yeah, because there was a really tall BLM guy. He wasn't even dressed in a BLM uniform. I think he was FBI. He had an earpiece in. He got out of the vehicle after pretty much this thing was unfolding. And I remember him putting his hand to his ear. And next thing you know, he put his hand up and made a big circle, and everybody took off. So he heard something. He heard something like, "Get out of there," And I'm pretty sure I know what they had seen, because they had drones flying over.
So did they back up off the...
They immediately...
Well, the four-wheeler was pinched up there under a front passenger side tire. So they backed off of it and pulled around?
I can't remember
exactly. Is that where Pete Santilli had his vehicle?
Pete Santilli was actually across the street. Pete Santilli really didn't block him off, in my opinion. Of course, that's one of the things he pled guilty to is, impeding him. And they could have got around him easy. That was just one of them BS charges. So, but then all of a sudden it was just like somebody flipped the switch, and they were jumping in their vehicles and getting the heck out of there. So it was obvious to me and Colonel Potter, something had just happened where they got the word to get the heck out of there. And I was able, in my mind at least, put two and two together and, figure out exactly what was going on.
So what do you think the bug out was then?
The bug out, they identified that there was two individuals with high-powered rifles right across the bridge. And those two individuals were watching things very, very closely. So had they actually fired a few rounds into us, I think it would have been a really bad move on their part, because these individuals had some pretty long-range outfits, big scopes, heavy-duty calibers, and semi-automatics, big banana clips. So I think it would have been really ugly for those federal officers had they started to shoot at us, or because we weren't going to let them take us. I mean, it would have been a fisticuffs for sure. We did not recognize their authority. We do not recognize their authority to this day. We need them kicked out of Clark County. They need to get out here ASAP. They have backed off considerably. I don't know anything they've done since the 12th of February, 12th of February in 2014. Ryan Zinke has been here and beaten around the bush. I don't know. They haven't come to any conclusions. They're looking at the Gold Butte Monument borders again, though they were defined at one time, which, like Ammon said, interesting enough, they totally engulfed Cliven's ranch. That was not by accident. So now they're talking about restructuring those boundaries, but we haven't heard anything. So there's a few things going on. Right now, the Bureau of Land Management is, for the most part, they're just being a bunch of spokesmen for the government, or that branch of the government, Department of Interior, and that's about it. Nothing's happening. I think it'd be a huge mistake if they came in and tried to start this whole thing up again. It would be an act, in my opinion, it'd be an act of war. A lot of people would look at it the same way. And, we could not guarantee the safety of those BLM agents if they were there.
So this, you could trace roots of the resistance back many decades. And it's a slow pinch that, even 50 years of plan to move forward. And the styling of the citizenry of the world. And if you don't fit the mold, you're going to get squished out between the cracks. And it's not looking like it's looking good for us as a whole, but we are at a point where we can make a difference in fighting back. We definitely need to proceed with caution and not, as Hal says, don't put yourself in there where you're taken out, And you said, who said that it's better to live for your country? You just told me.
Oh, yeah, General George Patton. This kind of fits in with what happened to Bruce Doucette and some of the conversations I had with the members of the NLA, National Liberty Alliance, where they're like, well, patriots will do whatever it takes for freedom and liberty. And but we see this end around that the feds are doing with these common law courts and how they're getting everybody trapped. Well, in my answer to one of those individuals that sits on that board was General George Patton said, a young man came up to him and said, I'm willing to die for my country. This happened during World War II. And General George Patton told him, no, you let the other son of a bitch die for his country. We want you alive so you can keep on fighting. And that fits in really perfectly, as far as I'm concerned, with these people that are with the National Liberty Alliance, these common law courts, common law judges, administrators, and continental marshals. Because the fact of the matter is, you will get arrested by the feds, and you've got to go to their court. You got to go to their court.
Well, they arrested him at state level in Denver.
Yeah.
Which I talked to the FBI agent, Ryan English, and asked him, why didn't that go federal? And he says, well, they had considered all of that, even admitted that, or talking about kidnapping a judge, it's federal. they decided the venue there in the Denver District Court was where they wanted to go with that. And I found that very curious that they want to contain it to a state level, especially Colorado, that first of all, back in the 90s, did away with common law and codified the law into legal, and further come along where no longer did public servants have to have a bond, but they were covered then by county insurance, no accountability. And this is what led up to the filing of liens and the issuance of warrants for arrest. Of course, you got to really consider, and I saw it exposed there in the courtroom in testimony of the FBI agents I saw there on the stand, and their infiltration. They get in there and they kind of move things along in a direction that they'd like to see it go. We can see this example time and time again. So,
Well, really, I found it very interesting. The prosecution and most all their main witnesses were all feds, FBI, federal prosecutors. And I think the whole idea was to stay underneath the radar because they knew what just had taken place with these courts here in the state of Nevada and the federal courts. Okay, so that was not covered by any mainstream media. They were trying to keep it on the low.
So they were too.
Yeah.
Because Hate Watch had been, on top of these other guys before, and reported on that. Yeah. Ryan Lentz. So, they definitely trying to bury that and not have it to be common knowledge.
Well, this whole thing is so insidious when you take a step, 2 or 3 steps back and you really look at what's going on. It is without a doubt a trap. All these people that are members of the NLA, we're talking 54 counties out of 64 in Colorado, 32 states in the United States that have all been signing these documents. Now, at this point in time, it doesn't have to be an actual arrest warrant or a lien. The fact of the matter is anybody who signed any of these documents, according to what we could see, is part of a conspiracy. All right. So now they're setting a precedence by going after all these people, finding them guilty, and then they can go after all the unindicted co-conspirators, which it's going to be in the thousands. And they're taking our very, very best people. They're going to take our very, very best people out of the battle, and they're going to put them in prison. And they're taking these people when we need them the most to be vocal, to be out front, and to scream like a mashed cat, to be court observers or whatever it takes to get the information out there. Well, those are the people that they're taking out of the battle in this insidious plan that they have.
It's very interesting in the resistance and coming out into public forum. Ryan Bundy running for governor, Cliven Bundy speaking across the West out here, Carol Bundy and Jeanette Finicum. They just spoke up and are going to be up here in Salt Lake City, and going to be out in Modesto, California, I believe, towards the end of April, 19th or 20th, maybe, I believe. Mm-hmm. So people are out here, and this is serious resistance to government overreach and crimes of the state, and it is very much a rigged system, and one I guess it should consider to proceed with caution on their engagement, and don't throw yourself on as fodder on the fire, so to say. Okay, so let's come on from down there as the BLM made their escape, and on up so that was the right after the first week of April, and then on to April 11th, 12th, as the sheriff. I know that he met or spoke with Cliven Bundy on April the 11th, and that it was pretty much a done deal, and it was all over, and they were going to pack up and leave, and and he come along to give his spiel up there on the stage, and said, and I have it videoed myself, Sheriff Gillespie saying that he had it on the radio as he was coming out that the cows had been released.
Yep. Well, let me make a quick, I made a mistake on a date earlier. I said February 12th. I meant April 12th. That was really interesting because I was across the road there and listening as intently as we could. And the thing that I noticed, and I think I can draw a really good picture of this, but the whole thing I feel like was staged to be a false flag because the sheriff talked about, the first thing he's talked about is Gold Butte allotment's been open to the public. And of course, and everybody got all excited about that. The BLM was ceasing operations. Everybody got excited about that. And somebody said, what about the cattle? Well, what was interesting to me is the sheriff dropped down about 2 octaves and he said, well, almost under his breath, well, we're going to have to discuss that. So the vast majority of us, and I would say a good 90% of us, we went down to the Toquah Wash to watch the cattle to be released. Well, once we all started getting up there, and I mean, we were seeing anything but. The first thing that I noticed is a quarter mile west of the Toquah Wash is where all the MRAPs from the Metro Police Department were showing up. You had all kinds of cruisers there. There was 22, 24 officers that were out in the middle of the street. And we were like, okay, this is getting very strange. Why are you bringing all these SWAT people out here? What's going on if what you just said was true, that the cattle be released? And that's when I decided, actually, I got there and there were some of the militia guys, I would say the unorganized militia guys, probably a dozen to 2 dozen of them, were jawing back and forth with a trooper who was there. And a trooper, he wasn't doing anybody any favors by responding. That was very unprofessional on his part. I will say the deputies that were there were very, very professional. They were not, responding in kind to a lot of the comments that were made, but then they're 50 yards away too. So I went and talked to the people that had been with us there in the protest area that had gone up there to that crossover. And I said, listen, just calm down, you guys. We don't need to have this kind of rhetoric going back and forth. It's not helping anybody. So I took it upon myself to go over to Metro. I really wanted to get a kind of an idea of what was going on. So I ended up talking to an officer, Tom Jenkins, and I told him, I said, we got a heavily armed militia here, and we were told these cattle are going to be released, and they're not going to take no for an answer. And we will take the cattle. And he looked at me and said, it isn't going to happen. And I shook his hand. I said, well, good luck. And I turned and walked away. So and then things started escalating from that point on really, really fast.
Everybody had already gone down under the bridge at that point?
No, not at that point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a short time. Let me just paint the picture that was there. You had Lombardo was there. Sheriff Lombardo was there. Sheriff Roberts was there. I think it was Tom Roberts. You had Ammon. Ryan Bundy showed up. Davey Bundy showed up. And there's some conversations going on there. I was a few feet away from them. I didn't want to interfere with what was being said. You had Pete Santilli was there. You had Dennis Michael Lynch was there from Fox News. And then, then the assortment of different people that were there that were paying really close attention. All of a sudden, this lady comes screaming up that the BLM was pointing rifles.
She said, they have them pinned down under the bridge. Yeah. And I was in the middle of the intersection and the interstate there, shaking like a dog crapping tacks, trying to talk to that row of Metro. And everybody just went, boom, going down that way. And so I'm like looking around, kind of looking stupid, and backed up, kind of made my way that way as well. And I ended up under the bridge beneath Eric Parker. Now, that picture of him was staged after the BLM had already left, and that wasn't able to be brought out in court.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that were not allowed to be in court.
It was posed, right? Yeah. I mean, he was posing after the fact.
Well, actually, the way that actually took place is there was a lady there. There were several people with a lot of good optics. One lady had like a spotting scope. There was people with binoculars. I was actually borrowed a set of 10 by 60 Zeiss binoculars. Anybody who knows about binoculars, those are the top of the line.
What are they?
There are 10 by 60 Zeiss binoculars, Zeis. And those are about the best, I think I spelled that right, best binoculars that you could get. The gentleman let me borrow them, had cranked out a great big old Zeiss spotting scope. And so anyhow, we were looking up there on the Mormon Mesa, and you could see the snipers up there. And that's when, we knew, everybody knew who they were going to focus on. Anybody's carrying a firearm. So Eric Parker actually got down. He actually got down so they couldn't have a clear shot at him. Now, if you go look at that, where, he put his rifle in the gap of the Jersey barrier. Now, I have that exact same rifle. I got two of those exact same rifles that he has, just different calibers. And the barrel only sticks out from the stock about 4.5 inches. Well, that Jersey barrier right where he was is about 18 inches deep. So your barrel can't even stick out. Plus, it's at an angle that you can't even see the BLM where they were stationed. You couldn't even see them. So you couldn't shoot them if you wanted to. You didn't have a clear line of sight. If you did try to shoot, you're going to shoot the Jersey barrier, and you're just going to probably blow your gun up. So he got down there initially just to get out of the sights of the snipers. Now we know,
which would have been behind him and to his left, I think, or no?
Actually, in front of him, up to the upper right, plus directly in front of him at approximately 300 long paces, is where Agent Swanson had set up. Agent Swanson was the one that on the stand said he pled for the traffic to stop so he could take the shot at Eric Parker when he popped his head back up. And in 1 minute he's talking about he wants to shoot Eric Parker in the head. The next minute he's crying because he saw a busload of school children that passed behind Eric Parker. So the guy's just a big old hypocrite, a fake phony. He did betray his country. He did commit treason, and he gets on the stage and cries because people are calling him, that he betrayed his oath. And the fact of the matter is that's exactly what the man did. And he is totally dishonored. He is a disgrace to his country, and he just needs to understand it and recognize that, and hopefully will repent of the things that he had done. So
that Agent Swanson, was that the man or the woman?
That was a man.
That was a man. Okay, yeah. Now the sniper was a woman.
No.
Yeah, there was a woman sniper.
Well,
there.
They were too far away till it was the one on the Mormon Mesa. You could not tell whether that was a man or a woman. We're talking.
Oh, well, we know from testimony.
Okay, maybe from testimony.
Yeah, female sniper.
Well,
and we've seen pictures of her laughing it up after having supposedly been terrified.
That's the same gal that was at the first, when we jumped them coming out of the hill. She's the one that pulled a pistol. She was behind the rest of the BLM agents. She was looking for a shooting lane. And that's the one where, I think Charlie, can't think of his name. He told her to put that gun up or he was going to do such and such. And then she was actually 400. She was all on the other side of the northbound I-15, a quarter of a mile away, stating that she was in danger. Somebody's pointing a gun at her, and you couldn't even see where she was. Now, whether she was a sniper or not, I don't know. I don't really recall that. But she would be the worst sniper on the face of the earth. Her testimony was so perjured and impeached, it was unbelievable. She's basically just a big liar.
They are all. And the common response that I saw in the courtroom by these feds were that they couldn't recall. I can't recall.
Between tears, they couldn't recall.
Yeah, that too. Crocodile tears.
Yeah.
And goes on the fears of the people of the world. We're really going to have to give an apology to history and all that these evil people have done in the past, from Hitler and Stalin and the many, many evil people that slowly, you just don't go to bed and wake up one morning and the world has changed. Or do you? And that's exactly what's coming. Increment, if not in a sudden rush, but certainly incrementally. And it's the tearing up and tearing us down.
Well, so many of these people are compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis, and they just take orders. They don't think for themselves. They just take orders and do whatever they're told to do, which is a recipe for disaster, because we're eventually going to have to face off with these people because they will continue. You know, you give them an inch, they take a mile, and that's why we are in the position we are in today. And, you know, you look across this country, look what's happening in Oregon right now, where Kate Brown, the governor, signed the order for gun confiscation. Well, what's going to happen there? People going to just give up their firearms? And this is the same thing that's taken place all across this country. Now there's actually some bills put out by these Democrats here in Nevada for the same thing, to start confiscation of firearms. And, you know, like I said, you give them an inch, they take a mile. It's already started in California. So people, if you want to remain free, you got to protect your Second Amendment rights at all costs, no matter what, at all costs. You got to. Do you want to live in a country where you're going to see your children and your grandchildren loaded up, you know, into FEMA camps and to be raped or murdered or whatever? You know, the good looking ones are going to be sold off to these big sex trafficking rings, and there goes your granddaughters, there goes your daughters. And, you know, guess what? They're going to point their finger at you in the next world and say, why didn't you do something? Well, you know what? Now's the time to do something. People need to stage rallies, protest, open carry to these places, and let these narcissistic employees know that we're not going to take it anymore. We are going to stand at all costs, and we are going to take our country back. And, you know, you can forget Trump I think he's doing the best he can. But the fact of the matter, the office of the President of the United States has been so.
It's a dump truck. I mean, yeah, a Trump dump.
The Trump dump. He can only do so much. There's so many of the old embeds that are there from the Obama administration, the Bush administration, and most of these people are judges. You know, they got all their judges in place, and that's why there's such corruption in our courts. This is a concerted effort, and, you know, they actually, to this day, they hold all the cards. And if we don't do something about it, they are going to win this whole thing. And so, you know, we have a limited amount of time. We have a small window of opportunity to take this country back. And we got to start doing stuff. You know, it's just like we got Ryan Bunny running for governor. Okay, we need to let everybody know that we're going to support him. I've already signed on to support him. Whatever he requires of me to help him become the governor, I will do. And that's, you know, we need to look for opportunities like that. When we see a gross encroachment upon our rights, our constitutional rights, people need to this, and don't look for somebody else to lead the way. You are your own leader, all right? Your word is your bond, is your honor. You know, if you want to see a free country, don't look for somebody to tell you what to do, because the moment you look for somebody to tell you what to do, you're not going to do anything. You've got to use your free agency, your freedom to show up and take a stand.
So let's see where we're at. Down there in the Toko Wash. Then a lot more people started showing up after that. Did you know you got to know several people there, I guess, and let's roll forward into Oregon.
Okay.
Back in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first hear? What did you hear about first? What, like the sugar pine mine going on?
Yeah, I heard about the sugar pine mine. In fact, I have all packed up and ready to leave for the sugar pine mine. And then the sheriff came out there, local sheriff, and said they're going to, use the courts to solve this mess. So I was a little disappointed there. From what I understand, though, they didn't need me for anything. It looked like they had it all under control. So the next thing I heard about was a protest there in Burns, Oregon. And I actually saw on Facebook where Ammon Bundy was asking everybody to show up for the protest. And so I said, okay, well, I was getting a little bit tired of protests. So they didn't, were we really doing anything, but I wanted to be there anyhow to show up. And so I figured I'd be there for a couple of 2-3 days. I loaded up a few things and I headed that direction.
And that was in September 2016?
No, that would have been the end of December. I think I got there around something like the 29th of December.
So when was there not what happened earlier in the year with the Hammond?
Oh, okay. Well, I found out about all that after I actually got there. I hadn't taken time to really find out. But Dwight and Stephen Hammond, they were railroaded by, again, another federal court system. There was a law that was used called domestic terrorism arson, which had been put on the books some years before to cover anybody that would light fires, to intimidate or to kill, any federal agents or property or anything like that. Well, the fact of the matter is backfires and these fires to rejuvenate the range has been something that's been going on for hundreds of years. And it was a normal practice. When I lived in Montana for many years, there in the Beaverhead Valley, you would get up in the springtime and it would just be smoke everywhere because the farmers and ranchers were burning off all the old grass, so the new stuff would come in, which is a lot more beneficial to the cattle and the animals.
Yeah, the ash too would provide some fertilizing.
Exactly. So they decided that was a act of terrorism. The federal government decided that was an act of terrorism. Well, I was able to fast forward it to the refuge, but there was 2 outfitters who came in to talk to us, and they said they had actual evidence, eyewitness evidence, that the BLM had actually started that fire, which was originally contributed to a lightning strike. And the Hammonds, Dwight and Stephen Hammond, got up and lit a backfire to protect their farm and ranch, and which under testimony by witnesses actually accomplished that very thing and protected other people's property. So what you had 2 events. One had taken place something like 7 or 8 years previous to it, and that particular thing was a controlled burn, which got a little bit out of control, burned 130 acres of quote-unquote BLM land or public land. But the fact of the matter is Dwight Hammond owned the grazing rights on that land, so he just burned up his own grass is what he did.
The assessment was that he actually improved by $100 and something dollars.
So they took into court on that, and they were found guilty by another federal court. They packed the jury, they cherry-picked the law, they cherry-picked the jury, they cherry-picked the evidence, and it's very, very extremely
Were they
difficult.
tried with that openly, that the terrorism charge that carried up to death sentence?
See, that was interesting. That was never mentioned to the jury.
Never mentioned.
That was never mentioned to the jury. So they were operating under some assumptions that didn't even apply to the situation, and they actually basically strong-armed one of Dwight Hammond's nephews, who has an extreme learning disability. He's somewhat mentally retarded, and they used his statement.
Probably coerced. He had some history of drug use as well, I believe.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure about that.
Well, I won't say that for certain. Yeah.
But he was not what you would call a good witness, period. He should have never been up there. Then there was this other bogus thing that was floated that they were trying to cover up from poaching some deer, which there was never any evidence presented from that. That just came from his nephew. And they used that witness and that statement to help convict Dwight and Stephen Hammond. Now, I'm going to dwell a little bit more into that. If you got thousands and thousands of cattle, why would you want to go eat some old mule deer that's been eating nothing but sagebrush? It doesn't taste near as good as a cow. And then if you're going to cover it up, the last thing you're going to do is start a fire to cover it up, because that brings out, your local fire department. That brings out the BLM fire department. That brings out the sheriff. It brings out all these people. No, that's just the stupidest thing. That whole thing was some conjured up deal by the prosecution, Papagni, which, by the way, he was presented with evidence by these two outfitters that I previously mentioned that would have completely exonerated Dwight and Stephen Hammond. So what happened to that evidence? Well, these two outfitters said that Papagni paid them a personal visit and actually threatened them to not bring that forward. So they kept on the low for a long time until we got out there at the refuge, and then they came in and decided to give their statements, and we have it on video. Now, right now, we don't know where it is. It's one of those things that was probably on Ammon's phone, and of course, the feds got his phone, so we don't know if it's someplace else or not.
Who was the guy you was talking about? You suspected may have, been doing some threatening. Pacquiao, what did you call him?
Papagni. That was the federal prosecuting attorney. And that information was also given to the defense attorney, which was never used. That would have totally exonerated Dwight and Stephen Hammond. So now you fast forward. Let's back up a little bit. The judge in that case said that it'd be cruel and unusual punishment to send Dwight and Stephen Hammond to prison for 5 years. So he gave, I forget who, I think the son got a year and the father got like 3 months. And then now you fast forward to just before the statute of limitations was to take place. And the state prosecuting attorney, I forget her name, she's actually been under indictment. And she's probably going to go to prison for some other things that she did. But anyhow, they decided just before the statute of limitations ran out to re-sentence them to the full 5 years. All right. And that's when, a lot of the patriots got involved. That's when Ammon Bundy decided to take a look at it. That's when a lot of the patriots started going to Oregon and tried to get the local sheriff. He was presented with a petition for redress agreements, which is found in your First Amendment rights, regardless of what Mr. Shapiro tried to tell us in the Bruce Doucette trial. That is part of your First Amendment right, is a petition for redress of grievances. It was totally ignored, not only by the local sheriff's day board, but Governor Kate Brown and anybody else that was involved in that. They totally ignored it. So what's the people to do? And that's what fueled this whole thing. That's what got this whole thing going. The more you learned about Dwight and Stephen Hammond, which a lot of the evidence came out from the refuge because certain individuals were able to get that evidence out. They showed the history of how the BLM, the federal government, was abusing this rancher over and over and over. And some of it got to be, it was so disgusting. The things that they were doing to this man, they were antagonizing him. They were making it impossible for him to run his ranch. They were putting up fences to block off his cattle from the water.
Block him from access. You need a break? Can you go to the bathroom?
No, I'm fine.
All right. Yeah. Let me step away here for a couple of minutes. I'll hand you back. Go from where you were at the protest in.
Okay.
So the Hammonds went and turned themselves in, right? So it happened, and that was kind of in there. Mm-hmm. And somebody suggested let's go to Malheur.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got there at Safeway that morning. It's right there in Burns. That's where the major part of the protest. There were several hundred people there, I'd guesstimate. And I didn't really know anybody. I knew Ammon, but I didn't know where he was. And he's just about the only person I really knew. There's a few others I knew. But I went over to one group that was there. That would have been some of the 3%ers under Brandon Curtis and Brooke Agresta. They didn't know me, and I was told that I was not welcome in their little get together as they were discussing some things, and I had no problem with that, you know. So I went to another group that it looked like a militia group, and I was told the same things. And, you know, get a move on. We don't want you here. We don't know who you are. So I was feeling a little put out, a little lonely there. And I happened to just look across the street there. There's a little eatery there, and I noticed John Ritzheimer. And I didn't know John Ritzheimer very well at all, but I knew who he was. And this is where it gets a little interesting to me. There was an arm that, as I was looking at John Ritzheimer across the street, arm appeared over my shoulder. I could tell it was a woman's voice, and she said, "You're wanted over there." And I didn't even turn around and look who it was, which is unusual for me, as I just don't usually do what people tell me to do. So I went over there, and I was the last one through the door. And there was a meeting that was taking place, and it was being conducted by Ammon Bundy. There was, probably, you know, on hindsight, I think there was actually around a couple dozen people there, though I wasn't paying attention to really anybody but Ammon. And Ammon had come up with this idea that we could continue this protest over at the Malheur Refuge. And, you know, so I thought it was a great idea. I told Ammon immediately. I said, yeah, you know, I'm all in. And quite a few others said, yeah, that was a good idea. And then there was some debate that took place. There were some people that weren't so keen on the idea. And so some of the people did walk out, said they didn't want to be a part of it, and that was okay. And so then the rest of us that were keen on the idea, we left a little bit early and started heading over to the roping arena, where we kind of got together, and to most of us, I don't think knew the way there. And Ryan Payne ended up showing up, and he knew the way there. And so we got together and, you know, got in a convoy, I guess you could call it. I don't even know what to really call it. It's just half a dozen vehicles headed out there. And it was 35 miles away from Burns. Out in the middle of nowhere, and we started heading that direction. And what really got interesting to me is we passed 3 different groups of law enforcement. I was convinced they knew where we were going, and I figured once we got there, they were going to have it blocked off, and we couldn't get there. But to my actual surprise, there was nothing blocked off. It was wide open. We just drove in, you know, nobody there to resist us. You know, we checked to see if anybody was actually there at the refuge. There was nobody there. And, you know, to my mind, my way of thinking, it was a whole lot better to sleep in one of those nice warm buildings than to sleep on the ground in the snow. So I had no problem just walking in and sitting down and enjoying that warmth. And, you know, I had a lot of questions that time. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I kind of figured that eventually somebody was going to show up and tell us to leave. And that I come to find out that was the whole plan. The plan was to get 86 or trespass. And found out later the reason for that, getting trespass, is that we could challenge jurisdiction or ownership in court. Interesting enough, before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is a appeal from the original trial up there in Oregon, where they wanted a clarification because the Congressional Act, I believe it was 1932, that the Malheur Refuge was to be liquidated as soon as possible, and that Congressional Act invited adverse possession. Well, that's actually what the whole idea turned out to be, was adverse possession. And if they trespassed us, then we could we could challenge their jurisdiction through that Congressional Act and be able to get the original landowners, or at least their families, back on that land and back doing ranching and whatever they were doing at that time. And there's really a checkered history of the Malheur Refuge and some of the things that took place there. It all started with Teddy Roosevelt. You know, here is Teddy Roosevelt used to be one of my heroes, and I realize now that he was, you know, up to no good, just like the rest of these presidents and political figures we've had since. But there was a lot of ranchers that didn't want to sell out, so the government flooded them out. so they had to leave. So this kind of stuff had been taking place for some time, and the whole idea was to challenge their jurisdiction and get that land back in the hands of the original ranchers that had their land stolen by the government through fraud. And that's why a lot of those records, and I don't know if we knew those records were there, but those records turned up. Dwight and Stephen Hammond's the whole history turned up right there at the Refuge. And not only them, but that many others also who had their land stolen from them. And we were actually in the process of contacting many of these ranchers. Now, that's kind of a hard deal to do because we had to go to the courthouse, find out where the original boundaries were, what had happened to those original owners. Were they still interested in reclaiming their land? Were they still alive? Where were their descendants? And so there's a lot of logistics there. But that was the end game. Is a lot of people were trying to say that we were trying to steal their land, and that wasn't it at all. We wanted to get the land back in the hands of the original owners, or at least their families if they weren't still alive. There's a lot of other things that were taking place there with logging, where the government had come in, the Forest Service had come in with their statutes and their codes, and were shutting off the loggers and the miners. And now, mind you, that county used to be the richest county in the state of Oregon, and it's actually the poorest at this point in time because of what had taken place. Now, when you look at these fires that we've had and how it's decimated Oregon and those counties, and especially Grant County, where that, what's county is Burns? I forgot. That's not Malheur. That's Harney County. Yeah, logging was their big thing, and now 60% of the people there work for the federal government. So unless you work for the federal government, you're in the poorhouse, and they use these people that work for the federal government to browbeat you into whatever their masters dictate. So the whole idea was to get Harney County and Grant County, some of these other counties up and going again, to benefit the local businesses, benefit the people who are living there so they could have a higher standard of living. Many of those people have had to leave. They're right on the edge of, some of them, from what I understand, are right on the edge of survival. So, it wasn't like we were just going in there with selfish self-interest reasons. That was far from it.
How? So when you showed up, you say there's maybe a couple of dozen folks and some left. Who are some of the people you might remember there?
Oh, gee, I'm not really good at. We had probably.
What groups were represented?
Ranchers primarily.
Ranchers,
and that was really, to me, I think was an anomaly for pretty much everybody. That's the last thing I expected was the influx of ranchers that came in there. Ultimately, close to 500 ranchers. But Obama had this monument that was going over there in Malheur County, and then there was one of the monument, Oahe Monument. And all told, there was something like 350 ranches that were going to be displaced. So you're looking at probably several thousand people that were going to be kicked out and going to be homeless here in the near future. Well, what happened is they caught wind of that whole thing. They wanted to know what was going on. And so some of these ranchers slowly started filtering in. And I'll never forget the first rancher. Him and his wife and his adopted son named Nick. See, my oldest son is named Nick also. And he came out there like gangbusters. I was the first one to meet him and welcome him. And also he was cussing me up one side and down the other. His son was cussing me up one side and threatening me. And I was just trying to be as calm as possible and talk to them. letting them know what was going on. Finally, Ammon walked up. I said, Ammon, would you please talk to these people? So I kind of turned it over to him. I sat back and listened. Ammon's always under control, very mild-mannered, very educated. And that was the first one. And we were able to assure them that they weren't going to lose any part of their ranch because they had water rights on the Malheur. And we assured them whatever they had, they were going to still have. And then it just started from there. Next thing you know, literally, we couldn't even accommodate the number of ranchers that were coming in there. We had standing room only. My main job was to keep the floors clean because they're muddy every day, provide coffee and donuts and things, and set up the room, set up chairs. And it got to the point where, the people were standing, actually the door was open at times where people were standing in the doorway because we had no more room to accommodate these ranches. And it was really a miracle that was taking place. Ammon and Ryan Bunny were teaching, had a big old chalkboard up there and explaining true federalism to them, the way it was supposed to work, what their constitutional rights were, adverse possession, prior appropriation, preemptive rights, all of those things were being brought up and taught to these ranchers. And it was amazing to me. I guess I'd probably just be in the same boat as an average rancher. You go into the ranching business, you expect certain things. I probably wouldn't even have looked into the constitutional aspects of it, and they hadn't. So this was really something that they needed to know. They were enjoying every minute of it, and it was great to see the light come on, their reactions, their eyes got big. We actually had one rancher and his family came out. The grandfather, the father, the mother, the grandson, and the daughter were there. And the grandson was actually doing a school project. And Ryan Bunny got the opportunity to teach him and teach that whole family. And the one thing I remember that really hit me hard was the mother. When it dawned on her that there was an avenue they could actually keep their ranch, excuse me, her voice started to choking up. She got a little bit emotional. Her little daughter picked up on that, and then she got a little bit emotional. And I was like, it hit me so hard. These are real people. These are real people, real families that are in terrible positions where you got some yahoo up in Washington, D.C., that can sign a piece of paper, what they call an executive order, and just kick these people off the land. And, that really kind of, I think, lit a fire under all the people who were there that could see and hear that. This righteous indignation would just swell up in your chest. And we all became angry at what this Obama administration was doing to these people. And ultimately, we had some of these people were very, very vocal too. I remember one gentleman, I don't remember his name, him and his wife were there. And he was screaming at the camera. There were several videos done of him, but they were all in the same boat. They all had the same story to tell. And, that was probably the most gratifying thing of all, to see these people starting to get mobilized and starting to actually take their life into their own hands. And that became known as, by Senator Ron Wyatt, the virus. That happened immediately.
Who was that senator?
Ron Wyatt, I believe is his name. And Kate Brown both started calling it the virus, which they were referring to the Constitution of the United States. This virus was spreading throughout Southeast Oregon. And, they had been monitoring this for some time with their FBI cameras, their informants that they had at the refuge. So they were very, very privy to exactly what was taking place. And then, of course, that's when Kate Brown called the White House and said this, there's correspondence to that effect. This has got to be stopped now. They saw that they were losing this battle. So they come in with their government thugs. In fact, they did that under a project it's called Infragard.
Spell that?
Infragard is
okay, gotcha.
INFRA.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And they can subcontract. And this is one of the things that you and I both found out at their Bruce Doucette's trial, how the government it's like their way they're washing their hands of the whole thing. They subcontract these mercenaries that came into Harney County. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that's the role Axe. I called him X. I had misunderstood him, and but he still looked like Dr. Xavier. Anyways, he came in and did this job for free. He had been retired Army intelligence and just a whole slew of positions he held throughout Joint Task Terrorism, the Homeland Security Post, head of security for Northrop and Denver, and boy, I'd like to see what he has off the books that he's done. Real mind screw guy. So, they get these people in here, and I just really wonder how much influence, how much mind screwing did he do to who all that he was involved with there, and bragged about how he just went in there and just like fooled them with a wide open book. Nobody asked, he said. Axe.
Well,
let me ask you a question.
These, I'm going to pick on him right now because I've dealt with these type of people. All my life I've run into these type of people, and these are egomaniacs, narcissistic. In fact, he sat across from us during some activities where the jury wasn't in there, and I was able to listen to him in his braggart attitude as he talked to, the regular prosecuting attorneys. This guy is nothing but an intellectual idiot, and I hope you hear this. Axe, that's his handle. AX, what is it? AXE?
Yeah.
That's his handle. That's not his real name.
Would you like some tea?
No, thanks.
Yeah, of course, quality, right?
So, this guy is just, to me, a low-life scumbag. He entrapped a lot of these people. He perpetuated this whole thing, sponsored it. This is typical FBI entrapment. That's how they do. That's what they do. And, again, these are the most, in my opinion, these are the most dangerous people amongst us today. Informants like this, FBI informants, there's a scripture, it's in the Mormon scriptures, and it talks about, goes something like this: woe be unto him that saith that he shall lie in order to catch a man in a lie. And it says, he also will be cast out into outer darkness with weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. These guys go in there, and the only thing they're doing is stroking their ego. They think they are so cool that they can entrap people and end up seeing them thrown into prison for the rest of their life. These are some of the lowest creatures on this earth. And you got to be aware of them. When somebody comes up like that as an informant, trying to entrap you, stay the hell away from them. So I think we got a little bit off track there. You got to hit it a little bit harder. There you go.
Hey, how about that?
So anyhow, backing up to some of the things that took place. The virus had to be stopped. It was the Constitution of the United States. That's going to give you an idea of how your politicians, you think, your Leos think. They don't care about your rights. They could care less. The only thing they're going to do is their job. Now, there's a standing joke that's been around for some time that there was 15 patriots at the Malheur Refuge, and 30 of them were informants. Now, that gives you an idea just how bad that really was. And it's extremely hard to vet these people. They're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. They're all gung-ho. They're going to support the Constitution. But at the same time, they're just stabbing you in the back. Now, we could mention a lot of names. We know who most of these people are, but their names has already been out there. But I do want to mention one, John Kilman, fabulous Fabio Menaggio. I'll never forget that when he first came to the Malheur Refuge.
Give me his name again.
His real name is Fabio Menaggio. 2 B's, I-O, and M-I Menaggio.
Yeah. Got it.
It's French. Anyhow, this guy.
And John, what was his other
John Kilman, it was his handle. So he was brought into me.
Oh, let me interrupt.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I always find it interesting, their names. Kilman.
Yeah.
Kilman. And there's another guy. What was
Joker J?
And what was
the Joker?
Yeah, and there was somebody else, another undercover, had a kind of curious name that was rather fitting. I forget. We'll probably come to remember it later.
Well, anyhow, he was brought into me, and I talked to him for a few minutes. The person that brought him in was all excited. You know, this guy's the kind of guy who could really help us. Anyhow, they left. I called that individual back into me, and I said, I'm going to tell you right now, that guy's an informant. That guy is a bad man. And, I mean, he had a black cloud around him. As soon as I talked to him, I mean, you could just feel this darkness about him. And sure enough, he turned out to be, one of those people that is actually a mercenary. He is a Interpol agent, and there was these mercenaries are all over Harney County. They would not identify themselves. They didn't have name tags. If you tried to talk to them, they wouldn't even talk to you. So that was an invasion by a foreign force, as Judge Darby said, and we could get no help from the government to come in and protect us at that time. I personally believe that Menaggio was instrumental in setting up the kill stop because it was done. They wanted to stop it before it got into what did they call it? A New World Order zone. They wanted to, or not a New World Order zone, or NATO, UN zone. That's what it was, UN zone. Well, who thinks of that kind of stuff? Think about that. So he was hired under Infraguard as a mercenary. He's an Interpol agent. He helped set that whole thing up. He's the one that knew where the UN zone was, and he knew that Grant County under the sheriff there, Glenn Palmer, was not a UN zone. Now, there are some things that need to be investigated there. Why is Harney County a UN zone? Who did that? When did that take place? Because you're going to find that most of Oregon is considered a UN zone. So this man was privy to that. There was MRAPs there that had French license plates. This individual fought
John Kilman, you said he spoke perfect English, and then he shows up in the court, and he said, I don't understand the English too good, huh? It's like an Italian or Frenchman, no? Oui?
Yeah, well, I'll tell the story about that. I managed to get his phone number, and then another gentleman got his phone number also. So we kept trying. I kept personally trying to tell people that had to get a hold of this guy. Nobody would pay any attention to me until, interesting enough, it was Terry Linnell. A lot of people don't know this. It was Terry Linnell who said this man was working for the government and had entrapped a bunch of people when they were out there target shooting. He's the one that did that whole thing, set up that training program.
And that was the same Frenchie that was doing that?
And so after Terry Linnell had contacted one of the attorneys, and I think it was Lisa Maxwell, said, you need to look into this guy. See, and all those people that put Terry Linnell down, this is just another feather in her cap, because I have been trying to get the attention of these attorneys to no avail. And I kind of don't blame them, because I know that everybody's trying to give them information or whatever, and you can't listen to everybody.
Well, hold on just a minute now. You had this Kilman's number, and there was somebody else. Was it Colonel Potter?
No. It was Carl Koenig. Carl had his number also. So finally, one of the investigators came up to me and said, you have this John Kilman's phone number? I go, yeah. Trying to give it to you. In fact, Shauna Cox was there and said, well, why didn't you tell us about this? I said, I've been trying to. But I gave them the phone number, and initially they decided it was a dead end. Because
you gave it to who? To the defense?
I gave it to the investigator for the defense. Yeah, I don't even recall her name. So, and then they backed off of it, and I asked Shauna Cox, I said, well, did you get a hold of it? So it was a bad number. I go, no, it's not a bad number. I said, it's a right number. So then I said, just ask Carl Koenig when he shows up, as he was headed that direction. I said, ask him. So sure enough, they asked him when he got there and got the same phone number. Well, this time they decided to continue to pursue it because what they were getting was Fabio Menaggio's ex-wife, and she wouldn't recognize the name John Kilman. So finally, they were able to get the information out of her to go to another lady who was his ex-girlfriend, and then they went to another ex-girlfriend, or to his existing girlfriend. So they went through like 3 different women to finally get a hold of him. And so then they sent a marshal to subpoena him in person and presented. At the time, he was working with as a BIA Leo with
BIA,
Bureau of Indian Affairs with the Hualapai Indian tribe.
And who was that? This Kilman fellow?
John Kilman.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's where they ultimately found him and subpoenaed him, and he had to leave. And
he was working there.
He was working there, law enforcement.
And
yep.
is it determined if he was considered an American citizen?
I don't think he is, but I don't know if it's ever determined. I doubt if he is. You know, he's working in the InfraGard program with the FBI, which is generally as foreigners.
So he's inserted.
He's a mercenary.
You know,
yeah.
we've got probably undoubtedly people inserted in all types of positions and seats of authority throughout of America.
Exactly.
So Webb.
Dual nationalities, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, they subpoena him. And what was amazing, what you just pointed to, when I talked to him, he spoke perfect English. You get him on the stand, and you can hardly understand anything the guy's saying. He emphasizes this French accent to the point you can hardly understand him. And then he's acting all stupid up there like, oh, please repeat the question, you know, this horrible broken English.
Please repeat that. I like to speak French. I like an Italian, okay? Because I like a spaghetti. That's why. Well, let's see here. So we had a lot of informants, and but so what was going on there is it was a teaching thing set up there. They were going out throughout all around the countryside speaking. Mm-hmm. Sheriffs with sheriffs with who else? I mean, they set up, but they were denied in Burns to be able to have a venue to speak.
Right? We denied our First Amendment rights in Burns. Judge Grasky, which is no judge at all, really, he locked down the entire town, that we would not be able to go to any public facilities to do any speaking, which is totally unconstitutional, totally illegal. And but you did get that one gal who speaks about the Constitution. I always forget her name.
That's
Kate. Chris Ann Hall.
Yeah.
Chris Ann Hall. Now, she did have one of her get-togethers there where she spoke in front of about 400 people, as I recall, 400 or 500 people, where Grasky and his get-together down there at the high school had like 100 people, 150 people.
And you said Ms. Hall had how many?
Like 400. 450, something like that. It was standing room only for Chris Ann Hall. Of course, he's
constitutional
lawyer, and she understands it very, very well. So this is the type of things that they were doing to us to try and shut us down any way that they could. So now I was actually doing the itinerary before I left there for Ammon in these different speaking engagements, everything from, the major news outlets to traveling to go speak in these different towns. And the one for Grant County, there was like another 400 people there that wanted to listen to Ammon and his presentation, and they were all geared up for that. They had all kinds of equipment, cameras, screens, recording equipment for this wonderful opportunity to meet and speak with these people. And, of course, we know what happened on the way there. We had an informant by the name of Mark McConnell, who to this day denies that he was an actual informant. I don't know how he can get around that. He was outed by the Oregon State Police when this Oregon State police officer was on the stand, and he taught they were corresponding with the FBI. The FBI said he was going to take his cue, that Oregon State Police would take their cue from one Mark McConnell. So, in order for that to not be true, you had to have the FBI and Oregon State Police all lying through their teeth. Now, that's not totally impossible, but it's very, very doubtful. So, and then, pretty much the rest is history that took place there. Everybody has seen the field forensics and the video of the murder, the cold-blooded, calculated murder of LaVoy Finicum. The HRT, they fired the first shots. Interesting enough, the judge in that whole case, which is R.C. Jones. R.C. Jones is an interesting judge. He's actually helped the Patriots somewhat in the past, but or the Ranchers somewhat in the past. But he denied the defense. They were trying to get all these charges kicked out, 5 different charges, and he denied that. So,
wait a minute, who's this Judge R.C. Jones? Where's he come from?
Well, Judge R.C. Jones goes back a long time. He was set over the Hage Ranch indictments.
And that's in Utah, right?
That's here. That's in Nye County.
Oh, in Nye County. That's right.
That's right next to Clark County.
Yeah, and his son, what a hero he stood up to be.
Yeah, that was Hage Jr. And they actually won in his court. And it was appealed by the prosecution, went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They said Judge R.C. Jones was biased against the government, and the whole thing was thrown out. So there you go. When you do get a judge, it actually gives you a fair opportunity to defend yourself. And his quote-unquote words, when it's all done, said that the BLM and the Forestry Department had committed fraud against the Hage Ranch that shocked the conscience of the court. Now think about that. And that thing gets totally overturned by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That shows you what we're dealing with these federal courts. They're a joke. You can't win in these things ultimately. So, we need to appeal their jurisdiction. People need to not recognize their jurisdiction and just send them packing, period.
Well, that's what a lot what those people with the FLA and the grand juries and these judges and all. And let's look at Arkansas. Countywide, you have justice of the peace. It's set on the quorum court. And so a quorum is very powerful. And I think in order to just not step right up and make a claim of jurisdiction, but maybe go about educating the people and you take a chance of getting killed just doing that. But and then bring people into from local into seats of decision. And you could start it at a single county. And if there was a serious movement, you think people would kind of maybe congregate in some place that was friendly. Idaho's looking friendly, except for the cold in the winter. And concentrate county by county.
Well, under common law, you had the Committee of Safety. And if you get a Committee of Safety in every county, they identify potential dangers that's from any number of different directions. And that was one of the responsibilities of the Committee of Safety, was to inform the grand juries that, okay, here's a problem, whether it be from the federal government or whatever. It needs to be addressed. It could be something as, like a floodplain issue, but it's something that had to be addressed. It was a danger to society. And so I fully expect committees of safety to keep popping up, especially in Clark County. If you have Ryan Bundy as a governor, you will see committees of safety. Now, what it does is it gives the people a voice, all right? And they can put it out there that we have this issue which we perceive as a danger to our society, regardless of where it's coming from. And then, it can be put into publications. It can go on the news, and you can keep kind of a bully pulpit, actually, to educate the people and keep this before the people until you get to the point where you have enough public opinion to start putting pressure on your politicians. That, to me, is probably the best way to go. It is educational. I know these dictators, they hate that. They despise that. I know in Burns County, the Committee of Safety actually did organize ultimately a common law grand jury. Now, you have 20, I think it's 25 members of a common law grand jury that are secret. Nobody's supposed to know who they are. Well, what happened is the FBI went door to door in Burns County trying to find out who these people were. So it gives you an idea, the fear that will go into these politicians, these corrupt individuals. And mind you, the FBI is about the most corrupt organization in the United States. I don't think there's anything more corrupt except for maybe the CIA or Council of Foreign Relations. But the FBI does primarily all their footwork. There's nothing in the Enclave Clause that provides for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is a fraud upon the American people. And, when you look at the upper echelons of leadership, look at Comey, look at McCabe, look at all of them. Now, people try to say that the rank and file, I keep hearing, well, the rank and file. No. It doesn't work that way. If the head is corrupt, the body is corrupt, all the way down to the toes. We were able to see this, you and I, especially in Bruce Doucette's trial with Special Agent Ryan English, and just listen to him as one of their witnesses. I mean, they have managed to be able to totally destroy the Constitution of the United States in those courts. And it is the foot soldiers that are doing that. It is the foot soldiers for the FBI that is entrapping people left and right. The whole
Raus! Up against the wall.
The whole thing is totally corrupt.
Corrupt. Yeah, we're looking at the SS, the Gestapo. It's all American now. So, hey, appreciate y'all tuning in. There's a lot we did not talk about, and I think Brandon and I will need to come back around. I don't even believe I introduced my guest, Brand Thornton. Here, this is Vincent Easley, this second. Aye. And so we'll be back next Friday, noon Central, and we're going to continue upon your gander about what matters. Take a little look around in the different perspectives that we might encounter. So let's look to see where we see things the same way and work towards that. We can argue about the things we don't agree with later on. It's a serious time in history. We need to get this done and fix this thing before it's too late. We're teetering on a precipice right now. And I've witnessed, and I've judged, I've stood as a juror, prosecutor, appointed sheriff for Riverside, Nevada. A lot of positions I've taken, reporting, investigator. We all can do something. Anyways, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Brand, thanks for coming along to talk, and let's get together. Definitely again. Now, Monday on the Ocelli Effect, I'm going to be having Mama Bear, Terry Lionel, and I'll have to get with Grimner, and we'll get him the encoder over there to Chuck, and we'll simulcast this year at Real Liberty Media from the Ocelli Effect. That's Ocelli.com, Ochelli, Ocelli.com. And thank you all, Chloe. I see you over there. We'll go ahead and bug this out now, Grimmer, and let me put my earpiece back in. Let me holler at you. And thanks again for listening, everybody. And, hey, for my critics, appreciate it. By the way, say what you will about me. You're welcome to, but no hit and run ad hominem attacks on other people on my page. So they're on Facebook. Anyways, thanks again. Thank you, Grimmer. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Peace.
All right, thanks to Vincent Easley. Good to have you back on RLM Radio here once again. And also very much thanks to your guest, Brand Thornton. Very informative stuff, interesting. And we'll be looking forward to more from you later on. A couple of show notes this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern at her normal time. Grammy Mary with Grammy's Rocket Chair right here on RLM Radio. We will not be on the YouTube, but we will be live on RLM Radio, which you can get at reallibertymedia.com or rlmradio.xyz. And then at 9 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Eastern is myself with the Mighty Moose Girl, myself, Grimner, with the Mighty Moose Girl on the Freakers Ball, also on RLM Radio, but also on the Freakers Ball show page right there on RealLibertyMedia.com, Channel 1. Talk to y'all later. Peace.